Hello and welcome to our lecture on craft versus fine art. Now, as we close out this section of the course, we've studied art mediums that have no question as to whether or not they are considered fine art or not. And this includes drawing, painting, sculpture, and later this week we're going to be talking about architecture. However, we also have this element called craft. And these are objects that have a utilitarian or functional aspect about them. Basically, we're going to be using these objects, or at least they have the ability to be used. And these types of mediums include jewelry, costume and couture, and the dresses here off to the left and the right. These are fantastic works by the Italian artist Mariano Fortuny. They retail today for about $100,000. They would have been worn in the 1920s to primarily speakeasies. It would literally be scandalous to wear clothes like this out in public. They're handmade of silk. Sewn in along with the silk are Venetian glass beads. And speaking of glass, this is also something that would be considered a craft, along with metalwork, furniture, and ceramics. And we'll be talking a lot about ceramics today. We'll see how they're constructed as well as the different quality levels involved in this medium. We recently talked about design styles, and we touched on the arts and crafts movement. I introduced you to William Morris, who was the head of that style. And Morris, of course, opened up his own company, Morris and Company, in 1861. And the image that you see here shows that he created two different product lines for his customers. At the right, we have the very fine estate furniture, which has hand-painted scenes of the personification of love in the background, very rich velvet as far as the cushion is concerned, but of course very, very expensive. At the left, we have workaday furniture, which is made more for the everyday man, because it was a lot more affordable. Morris was not the first person to do that, though. That happened a century earlier in the 1750s with Josiah Wedgwood. And his name is familiar because his works are also in museums, just like William Morris's are. This is called ornamental ware, where we had, again, high-quality artwork, hand-painted scenes on the surface, and just using the name ornamental lets us know that these really aren't supposed to be used, but they're supposed to be looked at and admired. The Porcelain vase is his most famous work that he created. The original Roman vase that he copied is at the right, and allegedly it took him 4 years to complete the vase there at the left. But this is his most famous work. But everyone could not afford the expensive ornamental ware, so he created useful ware. And even in the advertisements for this type of pottery, he said that this was made by machine. It was mass produced and also consequently inexpensive. We're going to take a look at where pottery kind of originated, particularly with the Aegean Sea here. We've got off to the left the mainland Greece. We have the island of Crete down below. And the KAMARES ware jug is where that was found. Dates back to 2000 BC, and it's really technologically advanced for something that's over 4,000 years old. It has a handle, it has a pour spout, and it's also really kind of beautiful to look at. It might even kind of look like a bird or some type of animal kind of looking up with the pour spout as the animal's bill. Even looks like there might be some footballs with the stitching on the surface of that pottery. In a lot of the, not only art history, but regular history books on ancient civilizations, it'll show octopus flask. And it's just one of those really cool artworks that were found, again, on the island of Crete. And this is a civilization that really relied on and responded to the sea. So you have this flask that kind of acts as an aquarium, if you will. And you've got the octopus on the inside, and it's perfectly fitted for that shaped vessel. Now, even though that one's the one that hits the history books, there's all sorts of other ones from that civilization that have also been found. And look at that one at the right, is extremely abstract. But probably my favorite from this time period is the harvester vase. This dates back to roughly 1500 BC, and this is a close-up of it. It's only about the size of an egg, and it's shaped about the same way. This is basically kind of one of those early civilization shot glasses because it would hold liquid, but we weren't really sure about its use. But it is about the same size as an egg or a shot glass. Around the circumference, though, is what's really amazing. There are 27 figures, and they look as if they're going off to a harvest or some type of religious festival. There's a certain audible quality to this work, and it was used for drinking on special occasions. Now, there's never been one found that has been perfectly intact, so we don't know if they were broken on purpose after they were drunk out of, or if it is just from a period of time. Originally also, these would have been covered in gold leaf. Another famous work is the DIPYLON vase. And this comes from really early Greek mainland civilization, right around the time of the first Olympics. And this is when Greece itself is kind of emerging from its dark ages. And we're still about another 400 years away from the real classical Greek sculptures. This was used as a grave marker. In fact, the reason we call this the DIPYLON vase is it was found in the DIPYLON cemetery in Athens. There are holes at the bottom of the vase. So what you would do is you would go and visit your departed friend. And of course, this was a person of some type of wealth or nobility because it had this fantastic grave marker, if you will. But you would mourn at the side of the grave, and then as you were drinking some wine, you would also pour some wine into this vessel, and it would trickle down into the earth. So it's if you were sharing a last drink with your friend who had departed. Officially, we're going to call this a crater, and that is just the style of pottery. It is made from terracotta, from reassembled pieces. It was found in fragments. And what's really great is when you look into the different registers, you can see that the top register, you have a person laying down. That's a cremation taking place. And if you had seen our lecture on painting, and I talked about encaustic paint and how these mummy portraits were made from encaustic paint, and their use was Egyptian, but the style was Greek. The Greeks would never have used mummy portraits because they cremated their dead, and this is indeed that cremation. We have the figures, again, very abstract. This is from what's called the geometric or orientalizing period. And these figures on either side of the cremation look as if they're pulling their hair out in anguish. Down below, we have that second register, again, very much abstract in terms of imagery, very geometric. Look at the way the horses are, one behind the other, still seemingly very flat. And the figures themselves that look like they're holding swords as well as shields are just placed very singly along the front of its surface. So not any real depth here in this scene. There was a lot of pottery that was used for trade, and this is one of those works. The Corinthian black figure amphora, and an amphora is, again, just a style of pottery similar to a crater, but this has two handles on it that would be used to carry the object, and what would be stored in here would be either wine or water. So this was found on the island of Rhodes, which is 50 miles east of Crete. However, all sorts of Greek pottery has been found in Italy, France, and as far away as Russia. And again, one of my favorites is Reveler's face. This is the first time in history that we have a name of an artist inscribed on a work. So 510 BC, we start to have artists who officially sign their name as if associating themselves with what they created. And this is also the time period where we start to look at art as being much more individualistic. So Euthymides is the artist here. He's from Athens, and he would inscribe his works rather than just sign it. He would sign his works, "Euthymides painted me." This is called red figure pottery, and there's only about 6 or 8 of his works remaining in the world. It is a study of one person, and you have 3 images on this side and 3 on the other, of just a person dancing around when he is drunk. So let's take a look at the different ways ceramics are created. We have slab construction, coiling, and throwing. So with slab construction, we take a piece of clay, very much like how we would use Play-Doh as a kid, and we would kind of stamp out this kind of circular image and then crimp the sides up. So it's very much in a way like making a pie crust. This is my example that I have in the textbook, and this is a tea bowl. It would be native to Japan, and even though it looks really large on the screen, it fits in the palm of your hand. It's very small, and you kind of see some cracking of the pottery on the upper left-hand side. That's from being fired in a kiln too quickly. So this is something that would be an example of slab construction. Now for coiling. Coiling is where we take a piece of clay and roll it out into long rope-like strands. And then we attach the ends together, and we'll stack them one on top of the other, and we will smooth or add texture as we go. And this is something that was used very much in the Native American population in the Southwest. This is how we created pottery in New Mexico, Arizona, and parts of California. Among the most famous artists to work in coiling is Maria Montoya Martinez and her husband. And these works are very sought after, and it's kind of unique because not only were they Native American, they were also considered very modernist artists, which is kind of, very unique combination of those two ideas. These works are made in the 1930s. They are very sought after by collectors. And again, when we look at these on the screen, they look kind of large, like maybe they're a couple of feet across. They are not. They're about the size of a small cereal bowl. Luckily, she made a lot of these, and they currently go at auction for around $400 each. So for a work by a very famous artist, these are very affordable for most people. And then we have throwing. Throwing is by far the most common way of ceramic construction, and it has been around for close to 6,000 years. That's when the pottery wheel came into existence. And of course, if you've seen like the movie Ghost, you have one of the more famous scenes from that movie with both Demi Moore and Patrick Swayze creating a work on a potter's wheel. Obviously, you're going to get something that is very symmetrical. And of course, you can add handles to these objects after they are complete. So now I want to talk about the different quality levels of ceramics. We have earthenware, stoneware, and porcelain. So our first type of ceramics is going to be earthenware. And this is considered the lowest grade only because when it's fired in a kiln, it's not fired at very high temperatures, and it's not fired for a very long amount of time. That leaves the object porous, so it's not going to hold water unless it is glazed after it's fired. We see this commonly used for flower pots where we do kind of want that air circulation around the soil and roots of the plant. Most of us are familiar with stoneware, and this is commonly used for our dinnerware and also our coffee mugs. It is fired for a longer period of time and at higher temperatures so that it is something that is going to hold water for us, even though they are very commonly glazed as well. And the highest quality of ceramics is porcelain. And this is first invented by the Chinese around 900 BC. And these objects were mainly used as export devices. We're going to move on to glass now. And glass is made from a couple of different techniques. One is where we literally take glass chips, put it on a ceramic core, as it was done in this pottery here. It goes into a kiln and those chips of pottery fuse together. More commonly today, though, is glass blowing. And what I'd like you to do is down in the description, there is a link to a video that I'd like you to watch that shows how people do glass blowing. And once you're done watching that, you can come back to this video. Among the foremost glassmakers today is Dale Chihuly. And Chihuly is a person who owns his own glass school, runs his own glass school up in Washington. And he makes these individual pieces. In fact, I shouldn't even say he makes them, his students make them. As you can see, he lost one of his eyes earlier in life. I believe it was in an automobile accident. And so he has a problem with figuring out depth. So what he does is he designs these works, and he has his students and other craftsmen make these works for him. And they're really quite amazing, and they're very, very popular. Then we're going to talk about textiles. And I know a lot of books refer to these as fiber arts. They're not. They are definitely textiles. And they're becoming more widely collected and displayed in museums along with glass. Two of the terms you need to know for textiles is warp and weft. And those terms depict which direction that the thread is going. So when you have a loom, you have what are called warp threads that are attached. And those warp threads go north and south. They are very tightly woven, so they're very taut. And then you shuttle in between the warp threads what are called the weft threads. And you can think of weft rhyming with left. And these threads go left and right, or east and west, if you will. This is what actually creates the design that you're looking at when you're looking at a textile. So there is a video that I would like you to watch. It is also in the description, and you don't have to watch the entire video. I believe I have it set up to about the halfway through mark, where it actually shows someone going through on an old-fashioned loom and creating a textile. Once you're done with that, you can come back to this video. So one of the reasons that we need to know why the warp and weft are important is, of course, how to hang a textile. When you have a work that is just geometric pattern, which way does it go? Because if you hang this from the wrong threads, you're in big trouble because it's going to distort the image. What you want to do is when you hang a textile, you want all the warp threads still vertically, just like they were on a loom. Because they're so taut, they do not stretch and they will not disfigure the textile. If you hang these from the weft threads, all of a sudden there is play to this side and it begins to distort. The same can be said if you're creating your own clothing. So you have to make sure all those pieces of fabric that you're stitching together, that you have all the warp threads going in the same direction. And it's real easy to tell the warp threads because literally if this was a towel, you could pull on the different sides and see which one gave to some pressure and which one didn't. Of course, earlier on in the semester, in fact, the very first artwork that I showed you was The Gates by Christo and his wife, Jean-Claude. They are the artists that use textiles most actively in their artwork. And of course, this one was in New York's Central Park. But that wasn't the only one that they did, or the only style. They surrounded the bridge at the right. This is the Pont Neuf, the very first bridge in France, with textile. And off to the left is the German Parliament building. 27 miles of fabric that created this fence. It's called running fence. In the mid-1970s, again, Northern California, and it ended at the Pacific Ocean. Up top, we have Biscayne Bay, right outside of Miami. We have a old phone booth covered up. That's one of his earlier works from the 60s. That's when he first started using textile. And down below is from Rifle Gap, Colorado. This is called the Valley Curtain, and you can even find a video on YouTube, I believe, that shows the creation of this. And it's about a 30-minute video. It's definitely worth the watch. But unfortunately, the winds through this valley were too strong for the fabric, and it was destroyed only after about 3 days. And Christo and his wife, their works are only meant to be ephemeral anyway, but they're supposed to last for about 2 weeks. Another medium that falls into this category is mosaic. And this is something that's becoming more and more popular again. This is where we take small pieces of stone, glass, or tile, and we arrange them to create not only patterns, but also images. And they can be anywhere. I've seen mosaics on the floor to walk on the walls, and also on ceilings. This is a medium that kind of reached its high point during the Roman Empire, even more popular than paintings were. And unfortunately, it fell out of favor, but today we kind of like to do mosaics as a wonderful craft projects. The example I'm going to use on the study guide and for the exam is this one here, Justinian and his attendants. And this is in the Church of San Vitale. Before I tell you about it, I also wanted to point out when I told you how mosaics contain glass in them. The glass is shown at about a 45-degree angle emerging from the flatness of the wall. And what this does is it reflects the candlelight. So it almost looks in a way, when this is in a darkened church, and of course this is during the Roman Empire, we didn't have electricity or light bulbs or flashlights or anything like that. We had candles, and the flickering of the candles would illuminate on the glass that's emerging from this image, and it would almost look like it was flickering. So a really wonderful artwork overall. But Justinian is here in the center of the work, and even though he had never been to the Church of San Vitale, it's letting the Roman people know that he is still the person that is leading the Roman Empire, and here in a very much a dual role as a leader of the church as well. So you have his military advisors, you have his church advisors. This is before the time, of course, of linear perspective, so the image is very flat, it's very frontal. There is no horizon line. It almost looks as if these people are kind of floating off of the ground a little bit. There is no secure ground line where all these people are resting. Justinian is also holding the bowl for the bread, which is going to be used as part of the Eucharist. Now, this is on one side of the altar, whereas on the other side, we have his wife, THEODORA, along with her attendants. Again, this is a mosaic, and she is a stand-in for Mary, just as Justinian was a stand-in for Christ. They both have that halo around their head, which signifies them as a religious figure. She's holding a goblet that would be filled with wine, the other half of the Eucharist. And we even have looks like embroidered onto her dress are the three Magi. Our next medium is collage, and we had done this for an earlier project in Art 101 classes. The collage is a work made by pasting various scraps of material, and I should say two-dimensional material specifically, such as cloth, paper, photographs, onto a two-dimensional surface, whether it's canvas, wood, illustration board, or paper. A very popular medium in the 60s, where we've got the civil rights movement going on. This is by Romare Bearden, who is one of those instrumental individuals from the civil rights movement. He led a group called Spiral. I definitely suggest you spend some time doing a little bit of research on the writings that they created, and you'll see how equivalent it is to today's times. He took photographs out of magazines, Ebony magazine, Look magazine, and Life magazine. And he created these beautiful scenarios of depicting the Black experience in the 1960s. This is another one we had looked at earlier for our project called Blues at the Crossroads. Picasso, also noted for using collage, and probably considered the first major artist to make this a very popular medium, almost a fine art. And I also want to talk about the term mixed media. As the name suggests, this is when we have an abundance of different forms of media into an artwork. So instead of listing each of these components out, on the didactic label, which is what's next to an artwork at a museum or a gallery, we'll just read it as mixed medium. So a didactic label is going to say, for instance, the title of the artwork, the name of the artist, when it was produced, and if it was a painting, it might list it as oil on canvas, it might list it as tempera on panel, but for a lot of sculpture, particularly post-World War II, we'll have what's called mixed media, and it's kind of very contemporary in name. This is where we find our assemblage sculpture. So we have non-art elements coming together to make an artwork. And again, assemblage sculpture is how this would fall under. The title of this work is Monogram. It's by Robert Rauschenberg, created in the 1950s. So it's kind of just before we get into pop art and the artists such as Andy Warhol and Claes Oldenburg. We have Edward Kienholz at the left, Salvador Dali at the right. And so the illegal operation, which we talked about in the sculpture lecture, absolutely this would be mixed media. So you would not have to list out a light bulb, a light, a bag of cement, a grocery cart, things like that. We can just call it mixed media, and it makes the didactic label just a lot cleaner. And so this is where I'm going to end our lecture for craft versus fine art. Please make sure you have gone to the videos and watched them that are in the description.